Tonight, a story about a small broken machine, and the very long time it took anyone to understand it. It is a true story. It has no villains in it, and nothing frightening, and it moves at about the pace of a museum on a wet afternoon, which is exactly what we want. You do not need to hold on to the details. Names, dates, numbers, let them go past. If you fall asleep before the end, that is not a failure, that is the point. Get comfortable. We will begin with a storm, but only briefly, and only at a distance. In the spring of 1900, a small fleet of sponge divers was working its way home. They came from the island of Symi, in the Dodecanese, and they had been diving for sponges off the coast of North Africa. Their captain was a man named Demetrius Contus. Sponge diving in those years was hard, dangerous work, done in heavy canvas suits with copper helmets and air pumped down by hand from the boat. On the way back they were caught by bad weather, and they put in near a small island called Antikythera, which sits in the channel between Crete and the Peloponnese. It is a modest place. A few hundred people, steep hillsides, not much shelter. While they waited out the weather, they went down anyway, to see what was on the seabed. One of the divers, Elias Stadiatis, came up and reported that there were bodies on the bottom. Horses, and people, lying in the sand. There is a version of this story in which he came up terrified and babbling. That version is almost certainly a later flourish. What is not in doubt is what he had actually seen. Not bodies. Statues. A great many of them, bronze and marble, lying where they had come to rest a very long time before. They had found a shipwreck, sitting at about 45 meters down, on a slope of the seabed. It was a large cargo ship, and it had gone down somewhere in the 1st century before the Common Era, carrying a load of Greek art, probably from the Eastern Aegean, probably heading west towards Rome, where there was a strong market at the time for Greek statues to decorate Roman houses. Contus took a bronze arm from one of the statues as proof, and when they got home the divers went to the Greek authorities rather than selling what they had found. The government took it seriously. Over the following winter and spring, from late 1900 into 1901, the Symi divers worked the wreck under naval supervision, in what became one of the first organized underwater archaeological recoveries anywhere. It was slow and it was risky. 45 meters is deep for that equipment. One of the divers died and 2 were left badly injured by the effects of the pressure, which were not yet properly understood. We will note that and move gently on. What came up was extraordinary. Marble horses, a bronze youth with one arm raised, a bronze philosopher's head, glassware, coins, furniture fittings, jars. All of it went to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where the statues drew crowds and the attention of scholars. And among the crates there were also the shapeless things. Lumps of corroded bronze and encrusted wood, green and grey, fused together by 2,000 years underwater. Sea water is not kind to bronze. It converts it slowly into a crumbly mineral crust, so that a delicate object can end up looking like a stone. Nobody was in a hurry to look at the lumps. Then, on the 17th of May, 1902, an archaeologist named Velleios Staris was examining one of them and noticed that it had split, and that inside the split there was something that should not have been there. A gearwheel. Small, thin, with regular triangular teeth cut around its edge. He could see the teeth clearly. He also saw inscriptions in Greek letters on the surfaces. This should not have existed. Toothed gearing in a compact mechanism, from an ancient Greek shipwreck. It was so far outside what anyone believed about the ancient world that the first serious reaction was to assume the object had fallen into the wreck much later, from some passing ship of a more recent century. That objection did not hold for very long. The lump had come up with material from the wreck, the inscriptions were in ancient Greek letterforms, and the whole assemblage belonged together. So the object was real, and it was old, and now somebody had to work out what it was. This is where the story slows right down, and stays slow for the next 70 years. A German philologist, Albert Rehm, worked on the inscriptions in the early 1900s and got remarkably far, further than he was given credit for at the time. He recognized numbers in the text that looked astronomical. He suspected it was a calendar device of some kind. But he was working from fragments a few centimeters across, most of the surface hidden inside corroded metal, with nothing but his eyes and a magnifying glass. The pieces sat in the museum in Athens, in a case, occasionally written about, mostly not. Decades passed. A world war, then another one. The fragments were moved for safekeeping and moved back. Every so often someone would take an interest, publish a short paper, and move on. It is very ordinary how these things go. Nobody was withholding the answer. There simply was not yet a way to see inside. The person who broke it open, in a manner of speaking, was a British-born historian of science called Derek de Solla Price, who worked at Yale. He began looking at the mechanism in the 1950s and kept at it for 20 years. In the early 1970s he collaborated with a Greek nuclear physicist, Charalambos Karakalos, who took gamma-ray and X-ray images of the fragments. For the first time it was possible to count teeth on gears that no human eye had ever seen, buried in the middle of the corrosion. Price published his results in 1974, in a paper called Gears from the Greeks. He established that the device contained at least 30 interlocking bronze gearwheels, arranged in trains, driven by a hand crank on the side. He worked out some of the ratios. He proposed that it was a calendrical and astronomical calculator. He got some of the detail wrong, as first attempts do. But the central claim was correct and it was startling, and he said so plainly. Nothing else of this mechanical complexity is known from the ancient world, or indeed from anywhere, until the geared astronomical clocks built in European cathedral towns in the 14th century. That is a gap of about 1400 years. The next real step took another 30 years, and better machines. In 2005, a research team brought equipment to Athens that had never been applied to something like this. A firm that built X-ray systems for inspecting industrial castings constructed a scanner weighing about 8 tons and shipped it to the museum, which allowed the fragments to be imaged in 3 dimensions, slice by slice, at very fine resolution. At the same time, a technique for imaging surfaces under many different angles of light was used to bring out inscriptions worn almost to nothing. Suddenly the researchers could read text that had been unreadable for 2,000 years, and could count teeth precisely, and could see gears stacked behind gears. About 3,400 characters of Greek have now been recovered from the fragments, though the original probably carried something like 20,000. Much of it turns out to be an instruction manual, engraved onto the plates of the machine itself, explaining what the dials showed. Which is a rather touching thing to find. Whoever made it expected that someone else, later, would need to be told how to use it. So, what did it do? On the front, there was a large dial with 2 rings, one marked with the 12 signs of the zodiac and one with the days of the Egyptian calendar. Pointers moved around this dial, driven by the gearing, showing the position of the sun and the moon against the stars, and the date. There was a small silver and black ball that rotated to show the phase of the moon. There is good evidence that there were pointers for the 5 planets known to the Greeks as well, though those parts of the mechanism have not survived. On the back there were 2 large spiral dials. The upper one ran through 235 months, which is the Metonic cycle, the neat fact that 19 years is almost exactly 235 lunar months, and so the lunar and solar calendars come back into step. The lower spiral ran through 223 months, which is the Saros cycle, the period after which eclipses repeat in a similar pattern. Little inscribed glyphs on that dial predicted eclipses, and even indicated roughly what hour they would occur, and in some cases what color the moon might appear. There is one piece of engineering inside it that is worth staying awake for, if you can manage it, and if you cannot, it will keep. The moon does not move around the sky at a steady speed. It runs faster in one part of its orbit and slower in another. Greek astronomers had measured this and could describe it. The person who built this machine did not simply approximate it. They built it in. Deep in the gear train there is an arrangement of two gearwheels mounted on slightly different centers, one carrying a small pin that sits in a slot cut in the other. As they turn, the pin slides in and out along the slot, and the second wheel is driven a little faster, then a little slower, then faster again. A varying speed, produced from a steady one, by two flat pieces of bronze. It is called a pin and slot device, and it is doing, mechanically, what the astronomers were doing on paper. Somebody sat down with a theory of the moon's motion and asked how a machine could be made to feel it. That is the moment I would most like to have seen, and of course it is the one moment we have absolutely no record of. There is also a smaller dial, and it is charming. It is a 4-year dial, and its divisions are labeled with the names of Greek athletic festivals. The Olympics, the Pythian Games at Delphi, Nemea, Isthmia, a couple of smaller local ones. So this machine, which tracked eclipses and the wandering moon, also told you which games were on this year. The heavens and the sports calendar, on the same brass plate, turned by the same crank. As for who made it, and where, we do not know. The month names inscribed on the calendar dial belong to a Corinthian type of calendar, which points towards northwestern Greece, or towards Syracuse in Sicily, or towards one of the Corinthian colonies. Syracuse invites people to think of Archimedes, who is recorded as having built a device that showed the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, and about whom Cicero wrote admiringly. That connection is tempting and entirely unproven. Archimedes died in 212 before the Common Era, and the mechanism is generally dated later, somewhere between about 150 and 60 before the Common Era, though the estimates have shifted more than once and may shift again. The wider point, the one that took a century to become obvious, is this. For a long time the standard picture of the ancient Greeks was that they were superb at theory and rather uninterested in machinery. Brilliant geometers, indifferent engineers. The Antikythera mechanism does not fit that picture at all, and its very existence tells us something about the pieces we do not have. A device this refined, with cut teeth, stacked gear trains, a hand-engraved manual and a pin and slot correction, is not a first attempt. Nobody makes that on their first go. There must have been a tradition behind it, workshops, earlier and simpler versions, people who taught other people how to cut a gearwheel. All of that is gone. Bronze was valuable, and bronze objects were melted down and reused for centuries, which is why so little ancient metalwork survives at all. This one survived precisely because it sank. A ship went down in a channel between two islands, and the sea took the whole cargo out of circulation, and kept it, and gave it back 2,000 years later to some sponge divers who had only stopped there because of the weather. It is in Athens now, in a quiet case, in several pieces, still green. People walk past it on their way to the statues. If you want an image to take with you into sleep, take that one. A small broken machine in a glass case, in a dim room, holding still. Behind it, somewhere, a workshop that no longer exists, and a person who knew exactly how the moon moves. There is another story here whenever you would like one. For now, rest. Good night.